Hello and welcome in to another edition of the Stretch Big podcast. I know once again it's been a while, but it's been a long few weeks with some personal things going on in my life. But I made the trip to Madison, Wisconsin this past weekend. It was pre-planned, well in advance. Wanted to see a few friends in the Milwaukee area, get my semi-yearly restock of New Glarus Belgian Reds. And then I went to a basketball game on Sunday at the Kohl Center, where Nebraska lost its sixth straight game. They now sit at 12-8 on the season and 2-7 in Big Ten play. And to say that the season is it's past every game is going to feel like a crossroads, but you could probably argue that we're past the crossroads at this point. I figured it was time to just sit down and give my honest thoughts on the state of this Nebraska season. Obviously, content wise from me, this has not gone the way I planned it to. The way that the last month has gone for Nebraska basketball has not gone how I think anyone expected when they were sitting at 12-2 and 2-1 in the Big Ten just 3 short weeks ago. So gonna be maybe a little lengthy. I took some questions on Twitter. I got some DMs, some things to answer. Well, that's how we'll wrap up this episode. But just gonna start with the 10,000-foot view and then go down to just what I've seen in the last 6 games from Nebraska. Going back to, sitting here, number 18 Illinois this will be dropping the morning of, Illinois coming to Pinnacle Bank Arena. It doesn't get any easier with Illinois and Oregon as the next 2 up for Nebraska. So call this the State of the Season episode of the Stretch Big. Plenty to share, plenty more to come. But first, a word from our sponsor. New year, same sponsor though. It may be a new year, but this season of the Stretch Big Pod is proudly presented by Bird Darts, Nebraska's own golf company, and the original premium pack of tees. You can see them if you're watching the YouTube stream. I got the hat on. I got the sweatshirt on too. Shout out to the Bird Darts folks, good people. But started by my guy Brett Sapp. Bird Darts offers premium golf tees. The apparel is modeled by yours truly. I'll never call myself a model, but I am rocking the apparel and custom packs to amplify your brand, whether for promo or retail. Each stylishly designed pack. You got 18 of these tees, and it's you don't have to be digging through your bag to find tees when you're playing golf. I know it's January, it's the heart of basketball season, but we've been teased recently with some of this weather for when golf will be here. And plus, when golf season comes around, you got to break the ice. If you're playing with strangers or you have some buddies you haven't seen in a while, you pull out a pack of these, you'll get some conversation going. So it's time. Start expecting more from your golf tees. Join the flock today. Birddarts.com. Get your gear, get your packs, or get your cartons. There's options all over the place. Bird Darts. Swing away. Big thanks again to the good people at Bird Darts for sticking with us throughout what's been a topsy-turvy content season, but they're sticking with us. I mean, it was 50-something degrees today in the Omaha area. I was kind of tempted to get out to the driving range. Golf is going to sneak back into our lives before we know it. Those Masters commercials are on. The whole deal. It's golf time, and whether you're watching TGL, golf's on the brain. But this is a basketball podcast, so enough about the golf. But like I said, I was in the building at the Kohl Center on Sunday. Nebraska falls 83-55 to Wisconsin, and that is a 6-game losing streak now for Nebraska. Iowa, Purdue, Rutgers, Maryland, USC, Wisconsin. And now Nebraska now has 3 28-plus point road defeats. They lost by 28 on Sunday. They lost by 36 at Purdue back on January 12th, and then the 37-point shellacking at the hands of Sparty, Tom Izzo's crew, who went through December and January undefeated for the first time in program and under Izzo, which I think is pretty impressive. Michigan State may have not been getting enough credit. They're kind of turning it on right now. But Nebraska, this is going to be pretty blunt. And I waited to do this because I knew we were going to hear from Fred Hoiberg and a player, which we did on Wednesday morning. And Fred Hoiberg was about as blunt as he could possibly be. I mean, he usually does not mince words, but he's going to give you he's going to give you a professional answer. He's a professional. He's not going to, he was about as open and transparent as we've seen him in his 6 seasons as the head coach at Nebraska. On Wednesday morning, talking about the trying to avoid the "here we go again" attitude, talking about how they've lost their identity, talking about the basketball gods and how they can be tricky. And it was a different version of Fred Hoiberg, and he was pretty honest. He said 23 days ago we were 12-2, we were 2-1 in the league, we had the 9th ranked defense in the country, and I think we were projected a projected 5 seed. We were doing a lot of really good things, and then we lost our identity. Our identity was a gritty, dirty, ugly, just grinded out type of team. Right now, we're not getting those stops, and that affects the ball going the other way. When we get stops, we had 11 in a row at one point in that Wisconsin game the other day, and you saw what that did to our offense. So Nebraska, they get down 19-2 early at Wisconsin. This is not going to be a play-by-play of that game, which will be 4 days in the rear view by the time this podcast drops. But that was what felt the most like the "here we go again." Like, I got asked, when did you regret making that trip? I'm like, well, it was pre-planned. I got to see friends. I got to, I got to check check plenty of personal boxes. But then they battled back. And Fred Hoiberg says that was sparked by Berke Butengill diving on the floor for a loose ball. And that's what sparked the run. Nebraska was down 19-2. They got to within 3, but then, I think Wisconsin was up, I want to say 10 at halftime, if I remember right. 28. They were up 20. They were up 40-28. They're up 12 at halftime. So Wisconsin puts it back to double digits, and they never really looked back. Nebraska came out flat in the second half. But the thing that I've tried to make clear to people in this stretch is Nebraska is still the same team they were when they were winning games. The questions about this group, about the team, about the personnel, they're still evident. They're still out there. Like, Bryce Williams is the number 1 option. Jawan Gary is the number 2 option. Those are the two, your 6th-year seniors who I listened to in front of them at Big Ten Media Day in Chicago talk about the legacy they wanted to leave, in their last year as Huskers, and being 6th-year guys, and everything that went into that, and the impact they wanted to leave on Nebraska basketball. And the way the season began, it looked like they were well on their way to making memories and leaving legacies with this season. But the questions about this group, they remain the same. Those are your top 2 options, and the biggest question remains, where else does the offense come from? And it's been up and down throughout the course of not just this streak, but the entire season. You've seen the roller coaster with Connor Essegian. You've seen flashes from Andrew Morgan. You've seen Berke. I mean, I called him the international man of mystery at the start of the year. I'd say he remains that, just because you see even the little flashes of potential. Like, they clearly want him to be taking threes. They think he can make those. I mean, I've seen him on tape make 4 or 5 threes in FIBA play, playing for the Turkish national team. But his first 2 games in his collegiate career where he's made multiple threes have been this season at Nebraska. The 3-point shooting was a question coming into the year. It's still a question. I mean, all these questions about this group are still the same. And that's like what kind of makes this all the more, I don't want to say like infuriating if you're a fan, but it's just like everything has reared its ugly head since the start of January. I mean, Nebraska, like I said, they're 2-7 in the Big Ten, and their 2 wins are against 2 of the bluest college basketball blue bloods in the history of the sport, in Indiana and UCLA. And now those 2 teams are having, they're middle of the pack Big Ten teams. They're not going to win the league. I think UCLA is a tournament team. Indiana probably is not, unless they, turn it up a little bit. But those are their 2 wins. Like, that's what makes it. I mean, there's so much weird about this. I mean, about the Big Ten this season anyway. Like, it's the Big Ten. Big Ten basketball is a mess again. And I feel like I've been saying that on this show for 2 years now. The show I used to do when I do these radio hits, I'm like, the Big Ten's a mess. And is that and then some once again. I'm looking at the Big Ten, Ken Palm page right now. Right now, Michigan State's projected to win the league with 16 wins. Purdue is projected to finish second with 15 wins in the league. Michigan 14, Maryland 13. Um, and just this mess of teams projected to win anywhere from 13 to 11 to 10 games. I mean, there's still majority of the league, and Nebraska showed that they can beat teams with better athletes than them. They've shown they can beat teams that play through the post. They've shown the ability to beat teams that can come at you in different ways. And what's even more evident now after hearing from Fred Hoiberg and Andrew Morgan on Wednesday is that it's not just a losing streak, it's an identity crisis. And Nebraska is dealing with that and then some. You could tell by their body language. I mean, that was the biggest thing I took away from my time in Madison was their body language was horrible. I mean, I know I haven't been in the day-to-day of a college basketball program in 6 years now. It's been a long time, but I've been around basketball enough. Both I was in a high school program for 2 years. I was in a college program for three. The just You can tell when just the vibes are off and the vibes are bad. And they talked about, Andrew Morgan said that Fred Hoiberg and the staff were showing him clips from earlier in the season just of the bench celebrating and the energy and the joy that they had, when they were playing. You could not There's not been any joy on this Nebraska team's faces for these last 6 games. You can see it, their energy coming off the floor to get into timeouts, the bench during the games. There's been any juice. There hasn't been any. And that, could be just a result of the losses piling up. That could be something going on behind the scenes. And Andrew Morgan, he got asked, Fred Hoiberg talked about, we've had some long, hard talks, with the guys this week. And I'll read this Andrew Morgan quote, in its entirety. Fred went first and then Andrew Morgan went second. And he got asked about, the tough talks and, how are guys reacting to that. And I'm trying to find it right here. I got the transcript in front of my face. Yeah. And he answered, he answered. I think they were received pretty well. I mean, guys on the team, really, everybody had to get their opinions out and what they really felt was wrong or what needed to be fixed. And I think it helped us a lot. A lot of guys had very informative stuff that we didn't even know was on their mind, which really helped us understand why they were being the way they were. And it really helps a team when you're just as open as you can possibly be and see not necessarily the issues, but the concerns that guys have and things that they don't feel quite right about. So once we got those out and when everybody kind of understands where everybody's coming from now and we see what we can do better as a team, we're feeling like we can put this train back on the tracks. That gives me even worse vibes because that sounds like that just sounds like the Festivus episode of Seinfeld. And it's January. There are 11 games left. And that tells me that this Nebraska team basically had an airing of grievances with each other about the way guys were playing, maybe the way they were game planning. I mean, it could have been anything. And it sounds like they just had a come to Jesus like airing of grievances and left it all out there and didn't hold back. And it kind of, you know, that's pretty eye-opening. And it's January. There are 11 games left. Fred Hoiberg talked about how, the rest of the season, every game's got to be the Super Bowl. They can't be looking forward or looking back. They got to, the coaching cliches of one game at a time and everything that goes along with that. But I mean, that gives me a pretty good look into just how uneasy the last couple of weeks have been for this group and for that program. That was the most like eye-opening quote from the availability the other day. And I think that there's like, I mean, that just tells me that obviously something was off, and you can tell by the way guys look during games, during timeouts, that there's been something off, and it's on top of the results, I think it's clearly reared its ugly head these last few weeks. Um, and the thing is, I've said this for the last couple years now that Fred Hoiberg was nicknamed the mayor because he actually got write-in votes in the Ames mayoral election when he was at Iowa State. But he is often gonna talk like a politician talks. He's gonna repeat some of the same talking points, and that's no insult to Fred. But when you look at this 6-game losing streak, all of the 6 losses have contradicted things that anyone, whether you're a Nebraska basketball fan or someone who's been around the program these last couple years, all 6 losses have contradicted one thing or another that has either been a talking point for this team and this season, or what kind of had been the feeling with what is been dubbed Fred Hoiberg 2.0, the last 2 and now more than a half years of Nebraska basketball. I mean, go back to January 7th, that Iowa game. We saw earlier this season when Nebraska went on the road to Creighton, threw the first punch, and put on a defensive masterclass with their rotations and their juice, and they're flying around with their hair on fire, that they can get up on the road and they can play teams that play high tempo transition basketball. And and when they're flying around with their heads on fire and their rotations are crisp and they're the tougher team, they can win on the road. They can get up for a rivalry game. And that Iowa game, they threw the first punch. They landed it. They had a 15-point lead, and they let it slip away and end up losing by 10 in overtime. The Purdue game, it had felt like the best performances from the new iteration of Fred Hoiberg's Nebraska basketball came in response to adversity, when their backs are against the wall and they need to respond. They lose by 37 to Michigan State early in the year. They come home and they dominate Indiana. They beat Indiana by 17. It's like, they lose to St. Mary's. And Fred Hoiberg, leading into Creighton, was like, how are we going to respond? It's all about the response. Their response to letting a 15-point lead slip away was looking like they didn't even get off the bus at Mackey Arena, and losing by 36, and Purdue hitting 19 threes and just going nuclear. And the crow that I had to eat after saying, like, the matchup on paper for Nebraska, they're play to their defensive potential and their rotations are crisp, and the personnel, they're the bigger team. Like, there were things to like about that matchup. And Joe Jackson said it on this very podcast, and it was the thing that I forgot about. What if Purdue just goes nuclear because they're at Mackey? And they did that day. The Rutgers game, this Nebraska team was talked ad nauseum preseason about the amount of experience that this team has. They have 6 seniors on this team. 6. These are dudes with 401ks, portfolios. They got their lives figured out. They've been in college that long. And, the get old, stay old mantra has become, it's become the word of the day in college basketball now, with the portal and roster construction. And Nebraska was the oldest team in the Big Ten last year. They were like, we've got experience again. We've got these 6 seniors. And then Rutgers comes to town, and 3 18-year-olds, 3 true freshmen, 2 of them who are NBA lottery picks, find a way to squeak out a win 85-82. And the similar thing with the Maryland game, another talking point that has been said plenty of times this year when asked about rotations and starting lineups, has been, it's not about who starts games, it's about who finishes games. And you could say Iowa, Rutgers, Maryland, and USC. If Nebraska wins the last 4 minutes of those games, they win. They win. Because the last 4 minutes came, and it looks like they panicked in all those games. They puckered up, they panicked, and they lose by 5 to USC, they lose by 3 to Rutgers, they lose by 3 to Maryland. They could have won all 3 of those games. And they didn't. And after USC, a team in year 1 under a new coach, that's, the tale of 2 programs. 2 NBA guys, 2 guys with NBA backgrounds, Fred Hoiberg, Eric Musselman, 2 guys who have, built rosters through the portal. And USC in year 1, they'd been on the struggle bus. They picked up a road win at Illinois, but they'd been on the struggle bus in the Big Ten. They come into Lincoln and win. And what's forgotten about that Rutgers game, that also snapped a 20-game home winning streak. So even after the struggles on the road, the thought with this team had been, well, they can protect home court at PBA. They still got the PBA streak. They got home. They got the Pinnacle Bank Arena magic. They got all that. That's gone now. That's out the door. This there's I still think there's the chance that they have a special performance in one of these games at home, special environment um, for one of these games. I don't know what game it'll be. I'm interested to see what the environment is like for this Illinois game on Thursday night. But and that just like all these things have contradicted what we thought we knew or what we thought about this team, about the current state of this program, and the identity that Fred Hoiberg said out loud that this group has lost right now. So they are not just in the midst of a losing streak, they're in the midst of a pretty deep identity crisis. And my biggest overarching question, and you'll see this in a column coming soon to HuskersIllustrated.com. Once you're done listening to this podcast, check out the write-up if you want more words from me to prepare for this Illinois game and just general thoughts on the season, is which one's got to end first? Do they got to get out of this identity crisis to snap the winning streak, snap the losing streak? Or does the old adage that winning cures everything, does that help them snap out of this identity crisis? Because I don't think that this team was bad the entire time, and that they just had a soft schedule, and they only beat Creighton and UCLA and Indiana because they missed a bunch of threes. I mean, they still had to score points in those games. They still had to stick to their game plan, stick to their identity and what they know in all those games. And I think this team, that people definitely got lost in the moment with the NCAA tournament projections and all that jazz. And I could admit I was probably guilty of that too, because I was bullish on this team. I said before the year that I liked this team on paper more than last year because of the amount of power conference experience and all sorts of different different variables that went into why I really liked this team. And when they were 12-2, I was like, well, that aged great. Like, that was a great take by me, thinking that this team could be better than last year's group on paper. But a 6-game slide later, and seeing 3 of the 6 up close, the 2 in Lincoln, and then 1 on the road. I mean, I think it's pretty evident that it's a pretty deep struggle that they're in right now. And Fred Hoiberg made reference to sports psychology and mindfulness, and that the guys are doing yoga. They were doing that before this, by the way. They were doing the mindfulness and the yoga before the before the winning streak. I knew that, but I mean, they are pushing all the buttons. It's been soul searching week. Since it's soul searching week for Nebraska basketball. That's what you can dub it. Soul searching. Might be what I call this podcast. I call it the state of the season, but I might call it soul searching. But this, I mean, Illinois coming in. Illinois is favored by 3.5 points the last time I looked. They're projected to win by 4 on KenPom still. So that tells me that the odds and the computers think Nebraska has a chance just because of home court and some of the analytics, some of the numbers. I'm not going to preview Illinois too much, but I mean, this Nebraska team, they're going through it right now, to put it lightly. I know you're probably yelling at your phone, like, of course they're going through it. They've lost 6 in a row. People were talking about, do we need to fire Fred Hoiberg? Like, should Nebraska fire Fred Hoiberg? No, that is my definitive answer is no. But that was one of the more popular questions I received via DM or Twitter, and that's how we're gonna end the show is the Q&As and the questions. But I mean, I think this team, you can see, I mean, this team was flawed from the beginning, and their margin for error has been paper thin. Not even, I mean, it's been since the start of the season, because the games where they've looked their best, they have played their absolute asses off. I mean, the Creighton game they were on, I mean, it was turned up to 11 from tip. It was turned up to 11 from tip against Indiana and UCLA. Those games were at home. but they were flying around with their hair on fire. They were playing tough as hell, physical as hell. I mean, the offense has been the offense has been a question all season. It's just been, it's been magnified these last six. Uh, Bryce Williams, the stretch that he has been on. That's what happens when you get into conference play. These teams are extra familiar with you, and there's more tape. And he was going to be the top of the scouting report, obviously, because he's far and away the best option. But I was tooting the horn about him being a first team All Big Ten guy, and I wanted to dub myself the driver of the Bryce Williams train. And there have been instances where he's looked a little lost. He's looked a little lost offensively, and um, he hasn't been as aggressive as some people want him to be. He's passed up shots. There's a lot of questions there, and I think guys go into slumps. Guys go into slumps, and Bryce Williams being in a slump is not a good recipe for this Nebraska team. Obviously, he had the game he had at Iowa, hits the buzzer beater to send it to OT. I think he had a decent game. He's had some. He had to grind his way to 17 points against USC. Maryland. There was one game where I forget. These games are all running together now. We had 14 against Maryland. He had Rutgers. It was him, and he had 21. Juwan had 20 in the Rutgers game. So it's been. Nebraska has been going as Bryce Williams and Juwan Gary do. Even when they have great nights, like their emotion, their body language especially has been the most telling. Nebraska goes as those two do. And it kind of feels like Groundhog Day, just honestly talking about who's your third scorer? Is it Essegian? Do you want it to be Morgan? What do you make of Burke? Some of the plays he's had that are head scratching. The point guard spot, where last year all season it was talked about how they don't have a point guard, and you know they need a point guard to run the Fred Hoiberg offense. They go from no true point guard to two with Raleigh Worcester and Aaron Eulis. Raleigh Worcester has been coming off the bench the last two games. Aaron Eulis started one game. He's been playing more after he had 10 assists against Maryland on the road. The point guard spot, huge question. The post depth, the post positions in general, Buchton, Joe, Morgan, Mia. Before the season, I said that was the most legitimate post depth Nebraska basketball's had, and Lord only knows how long. They have a legit 7-footer. They have 2 point guards, and they, the portal acquisitions they made this offseason have mostly not hit. There have been games where Essegian has, gone off and hit a bunch of threes, been the spark plug guy, but and Andrew Morgan's had a few, but I think you'd say the portal class, they have not been hits so far. And when you bring in, 6 portal guys, I think, Essegian, Morgan, Worcester, Berkay, Gavin Griffiths is out of the rotation. Braxton, I would count Eulis, I guess. He didn't transfer in this past offseason, but I think you'd call Essegian a hit and maybe Morgan because of the energy, but the rest of those guys, it's been it's left a lot to be desired from a basketball standpoint. And that leads into another very popular question that I received is about the portal and about the NIL operation and how that the roster construction. In this team, the biggest thing that's jumped out to me is just how slow they look, how not that athletic they look. I think about that Rutgers game. Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey are they're lottery picks. They made some very impressive shots. They're both just 18 years old. But that game, everything those two did looked so easy. Whether it was, the shot making from the outside, putting the ball on the floor and getting to the rim. Those two are freaky athletic. They're twitchy, quick, they'll blow by you. Nebraska doesn't have any quick twitch guys on this team. They don't. I don't think they had any quick twitch guys last year either, but I think that they are, well, maybe Jamarcus Lawrence last year, but you know the athleticism has jumped off the court at me. I mean, there were times when Nebraska looked slower than Wisconsin on Sunday. You don't want to look slower than Wisconsin in a basketball game, no matter who you are. And that's credit to Greg Gard for going all in on the offensive adjustment that they've made. Wisconsin's pretty good. I'll have to eat crow on them at the end of the season as well. But Nebraska, the athleticism, the athleticism gap, the lack of 3-point shooting, the and what I think is the biggest glaring thing with this team, and if you've listened to me for the last 3 years, you've heard me make this comparison so many times. Fred Hoiberg has been chasing the ghost of George Niang his entire time he's been at Nebraska. And I mean like point forward, chunky George Niang from the Iowa State days, the playmaking big. Nebraska has 3 big men on this roster. None of them are playmaking bigs like Rink Mast or Derek Walker. The 2 seasons before this, Nebraska's leading assist man was its starting center. Rink Mast last year, Derek Walker the year before, and the playmaking big, whether it's at Iowa State or when Nebraska has had success, has been so critical for Fred Hoiberg's teams. And this group doesn't have that. I think they want that to be Berke Buchten Gel, but I don't think, I mean, he has not shown that he's, he remains the biggest, like, they really need him to be good. Like, outside of Williams and Gary, they need a season to make threes, but they need Berke Buchten Gel to at least be serviceable, because some of his stat lines in this losing streak have been heinous. Some of the shot selection from him in this losing streak, even worse. And they need a guy built like him with his skill set. I'm a sicko. I've watched his, Turkish national team FIBA highlights where he's backing dudes down from almost the 3-point line and dunking on them, where he's hitting 4 threes in a game. He fit the mold of like Rink Mast and Keisei Tominaga, guys who have played internationally. They've represented their country. They've thrived in the FIBA game, and that just has not translated to the collegiate game for Berke Buchten Gel. Fred Hoiberg is waxed poetic about his basketball IQ and his skill set and his talent, and they really need a jump from Berke at some point, to help right this ship. Essegian and Buchten Gel are the guys that they need to be your second options, behind Williams and Juwan Gary. The 3-point shooting also, I mean, if you've listened to me on After Nebrasketball, if you've listened to me for a couple years, you know my thoughts on Juwan Gary shooting threes. And I'm all for like wanting your players to be confident and, hoping, and not wanting guys to pass up shots. Juwan Gary is shooting 27% from 3 this season. He has attempted 74 of them. He has made 20. His best 3-point shooting season was last year. He was a 30% shooter. He is 11 threes away from attempting as many as he did last season in its entirety. And there are still 11 games to go. He was a 26% 3-point shooter. In the 17 games he played 2 years ago before he went down with an injury. He's never been a 3-point shooter, and there are some of these games where he's taking the most attempts of anyone on this Nebraska roster. And I just there has to be better shot selection. There's to be better guys to be taking those shots. Man, another thing that stuck out is Nebraska does not run nearly as many set plays as I'd like them to, and I know that they want to run the NBA, read and react. Guys make the decisions, they make the right read, they make the right pass, and all of that. But I think with this group's personnel, I think you need to be drawing stuff up to get guys looks. And the thought has always been Fred Hoiberg, offensive wizard, offensive genius, and they don't run a lot of like set plays. They set a ton of ghost screens. They love setting ghost screens. That's the most like common thing you'll see when this team's on the court. And if you don't know what a ghost screen is, a ghost screen, it's basically a fake screen where the guy who would normally set the screen sprints away from the ball, and the screener goes toward the guy with the ball. He fakes it and then sprints to open space. They set so many ghost screens. They don't set any screens away for shooters. That was a thing last year. Like, set a screen away for Connor Essegian. Like, if you need him to be your 3-point guy, like, why is no one, like, it's like the John Wick, like, somebody get this man a gun. Somebody set this man a screen. I'd like to see them run more set plays. I know they have some pick and roll sets for Andrew Morgan. They run some of the same, like the CJ Wilcher plays for Essegian, either off the baseline or out of timeouts. But I'd like to see more sets, and I don't know, like, I'm not a basketball coach. I don't know half about basketball, as much about basketball as Fred Hoiberg does, but I'd like to see more set plays to try to get looks for guys, or draw something up for specific dudes on this team. I think that the I guess like my biggest overarching talking points are, this is the same team that we saw beat Creighton, that we saw smoke Indiana, that went out and won the Diamond Head Classic. Just everything that went right for the first 14 games of the season has flipped on its head and has gone wrong. Basketball season, it's a drag. It's a gauntlet. You hear all about the Big Ten gauntlet, and how the toll it takes on guys, and all that. And Nebraska's going through that right now. They are. They've been a step slow defensively. Their rotations have not looked nearly as crisp, and their energy just isn't as high as it was, for those games. And they're pushing all their chips into the middle of the table. They're pushing all the buttons. They're trying to do whatever it takes. And these next two games, Illinois is number 18 in the country. I forget where Oregon's ranked, but that's going to be a true road game in Eugene. West Coast swing followed by a trip to Seattle. They're gonna, it's. They're Nebraska. The word is desperate. That's what they are right now. This season has, there's a reason they were picked 12th in the preseason. You wouldn't have never thought that they finished 4th last year. At Big Ten Media Day, and it kind of felt like deja vu. For the first 14 games of the season, it felt like, oh, Nebraska was flying under the radar. Turns out they might be pretty good. And there are 11 games left in the season, and they have 12 wins right now. I think they're gonna. If you even want to think about, postseason. They got 11. 11 games. They gotta, even if they want to think about it, they gotta win. If they want to think about postseason, they gotta win 6 to start. They'd have to get to 7 or 8 to even think about it, and it depends on who. But we'll cross that bridge if we even get to it. Ken Pom projects Nebraska to go 17-14 on the year, 7-13 in the Big Ten. Bart Torvik, I believe, has the same record. 17-14, 7-13 in the Big Ten. Torvik has Nebraska's NCAA tournament odds at 12.7% and projects the next win to be at Washington on the 5th of February. So we'll transition to questions. We got questions from the audience, and I'm going to answer these as honestly as I can. And I asked for them. Here they are. What changed in the second? This is from Don. Don at iFormation on Twitter. He's a loyal engager of the podcast. Shout out to Don. And he's got the first question. What changed in the second half of the Iowa game to derail the season? They have been completely different since then. That's kind of what everyone's pointing back to, is that Iowa game. And that was when they started looking slow on defense, was that night in Iowa City. And Iowa was not making threes at the rate they did in that second half. And then they just went nuclear. Peyton Sanford, Josh Dix, both with 30-plus points. That was when their defensive effort and intensity looked half-assed compared to what it looked like for the first part of the year. And that just goes back to Fred Hoiberg talking about searching for that identity. So I think that just, the way they defend, and I've talked about this on plenty of other shows, they are clearly, for now, set in it. They're going to double the post. They're going to double the post. They're going to deny the baseline. They're going to block it off. They're going to, they're going to have a guy behind, the primary defender on the baseline, and they're going to scramble out to 3-point shooters. And it worked to a T against Creighton for the second time in 3 years. The two other teams that are known for, taking and making threes on the schedule, at least coming into the year, were Purdue and Iowa. And Iowa made 19. I think Purdue made 20. I mean, they went nuclear from three. Wisconsin also, hit them at a high clip on Sunday in Madison. And it's a numbers game. It's a math problem. It's a law of averages. It's always going to be a gamble, the way Nebraska chooses to defend. But I think that was the first game where their rotations and their defensive intensity were half-ass sounded, a little blunt, but just compared to what it was, they were a step slow, and they've looked a step slow ever since then. Ben on Twitter at Chubby Lumpkin. Shout out, Ben. We love the Western Nebraskans that listen to this podcast. This team didn't have a true point guard last year. Are they worse off with mediocre to poor point guard play this year versus no true point guard? I think Nebraska found the best form of itself last year when Bryce Williams was running the point. Fred Hoiberg said as much in his availability that their defensive metrics went up, and Bryce Williams' numbers looked better when he was point Bryce toward the end of last season. That's a good question, because there are nights where Raleigh Worcester has like 6 assists and 7 rebounds and 4 points, and it's just like, that's a pretty on brand stat line for Raleigh Worcester. And then there are games like Sunday in Madison, when he's attempting back down, turnaround, mid-range shots, and John Blackwell yells, "Hell fucking nah," excuse my French, when Raleigh Worcester is putting that shot up and it's caught on the BTN mic. Aaron Eulis is the more athletic of the two. He's like the transition guy. Like, if Nebraska was like a get out and go, like, we're going to play at 100 miles an hour team, he'd be the point guard, but his shot hasn't been great. He'll put the ball on the floor and try to get to the rim and get fouled. But that's a good question, because it's quite the conundrum, because it's like the way that the point guards look on this team, derivative of the guys around them. Like, was the no true point guard last year, like, was that just magnified when Nebraska lost games, or when they were struggling? Like, there's a lot of variables that go into it. I still think guard play is just so important. We hear it in March, like, the guard play wins, in the postseason, and the guard play has left plenty to be desired, for this Nebraska team, especially at the point. Bryce Williams is usually your 2. We've seen the flashes from him, but it's that spot has definitely left a lot to be desired, and it's been a talking point, since Fred Hoiberg's been here, whether it was Cam Mack or Delano Banton in the point guard spot, or Lonzo Verge, Sam Griesel. The point guard spot has been talked about ad nauseum during Fred Hoiberg's tenure. David asked, how do they get more NIL money for the program to have a better chance to get some better transfers? Consistency and winning. That was like, they needed a big offseason coming off of the first NCAA tournament in 10 years. You hoped that there would be an influx of donor support, and they could swing for the fences on with some portal guys. I mean, Nebraska's NIL operation for basketball, and I have to say with basketball, because yes, I know the offseason that football's had, no one wants to call it, desperation. They want to say, oh, it's smart investments and all these portal guys, but that's beside the point. The NIL operation for Nebraska basketball still leaves a lot to be desired. It's not to the point of Minnesota basketball, where there was recently a Minnesota Star Tribune article talking about how I forget who it was, transferred from Minnesota and left to go to Tulsa because he was given a better NIL opportunity at Tulsa. But it's still they've been trying to moneyball it, for lack of a better term, with like they want to allocate certain dollar amounts to how they value guys, and maybe that has come back to bite them with a few of the the targets that they swung for last year. Maybe if you want to get in the mix for a local product who's an all Summit League guy, and he hears the numbers from his agent, and he gets told that the Summit League school he's played for multiple years is offering him the same amount of NIL dollars that the Big Ten program down the road is, it's going to raise a few eyebrows. But that's how they value guys. Certain they got to work with what they have, and it kind of, I mean, it's not quite the money ball. There's rich teams, there's poor teams, there's 50 feet of crap, and then there's us. But there's this fallacy with Nebraska basketball, because they're in the Big Ten, they're ripe with resources. And when it comes to NIL, they have some, but they are not ripe with resources. They're like the Kansas City Royals in free agency, compared to some bigger market teams. That's the comparison that I'd make there. Logan asked, would it be smart to alter the defensive game plan when a team starts 5 of 6 from 3 and try to keep certain players off the 3-point line, or when guys catch fire at any point in the game, parentheses Iowa, maybe face guard someone instead of doubling every post entry? That's the defensive end. I mean, we've heard all about how it needs to be this team's constant. I'll just go ahead and say this. There's an assistant coach on this staff, Adam Howard, great guy. Interacted with him a bit, but when he was hired, we heard about this matchup zone that he ran at South Alabama, and that he learned from Donnie Tyndall, and that we haven't seen any of that since Adam Howard got here, and I'm kind of just waiting. Like, is that in the bag? Like, are we going to see it? Because I mean, Nebraska's defense remains a gamble. Yes, if I'm a coach, I would adjust the game plan. If I'm playing Rutgers and they don't have a true big, I'm not doubling the post. If I'm playing USC and they have, Rashawn G, who Eric Musselman calls a pick and pop 5, I'm probably not doubling the post with him either. I mean, there's some matchup dependent where I don't think I need to double the post, because not every team has Zach Edey or Ryan Kalkbrenner or even Stephen Crowell, like Wisconsin. I would like to see some defensive, like, is there any other schemes that they can go to? You've got a guy on the staff known for matchup zone. Where's the matchup zone been? I'm not saying that's what the first thing I want to see is, but, is there a backup plan? And that's not the first podcast I've said this on. I feel like I said this a couple years ago with the Greasel team. I mean, we've seen both ends of the spectrum, right? We've seen what it looks like when it's at its best against Creighton and Omaha this year, against Purdue and Lincoln last year, against even IU, that Indiana game. We've seen what it looks like when it's at its best, and we've also seen the opposite end of the spectrum when Iowa and Purdue go nuclear from 3. Ray makes the point that I made. He said they ran the offense to the post the past 2 years with an offense that had shooters. Lack of shooters and scoring threat at PG is an issue. He says no shooters, no athleticism, poor roster management, lack of defensive adjustments. I just talked about the defensive adjustments. The roster construction, I would agree with you. They did not, mean, they're squeezing every last bit of juice that they can get out of this roster. And I think they know what they've got. And they did miss on a lot of guys that they were after in the portal last year. I don't know what all the factors were, if it was, all NIL or fit or what have you, but I mean, the 3-point shooting and the no playmaking big. I've talked about that a couple times. Ray also asks, who do you think the team needed most this year? Lawrence Wilcher, healthy, Eli Rice, or Mast? If they had just one of those, would it be much better? I mean, my answer is Rink Mast. That's the playmaking big and everything that he'd bring to the table. And sneaky second, maybe CJ Wilcher, just for the 3-point shooting and the leadership. Matt asked, what happened to December Bryce? How do we get him back? He's just gonna have to adjust to the way he's being defended. Teams are getting extra physical with him. They're getting up into him. He's the top of the scouting report. He's gonna be the focal point, and he's just gonna have. He just has to. He knows that. This is his 6th year playing college basketball. It's gonna be like they're like what I talked about, like drawing up sets. Like, what can you draw up to try to get him a look, get him a shot? He loves that mid range too. I know Fred hates mid range, but I think draw something up just to get him going, like to just have him see something go in, feel some confidence. Mark asks a bunch of questions. Mark, he has a few. Why does Fred Hoiberg refuse to alter the defensive strategy? Why does he always blame lack of intensity or grit? Why doesn't the Nebraska media ask him any tough questions? Did he think Mia would be Walker Mast? If not, why was he recruited? Why has he never had a solid point guard? The defensive strategy, that's not Fred's call. Intensity or grit, you got to be intense and to play college basketball. You can't be lackadaisical and half-ass. And if you want to be a defensive team that he's openly said, we're not pretty, we have to be gritty, we have to be grimy, you got to be intense. You got to be committed to that. Like, you have like that is to be your MO. You have to be locked the hell in. You got to be intense. You got to, it sounds cliche as hell, I know. But if that's the identity and that's the recipe for success for your team, you got to have that. Night in and night out. You got to be locked the hell in. You got to be willing to get dirty and be grimy and gritty as hell. You have to be. Tough questions. I don't ask questions in press conferences. I asked the first question I've asked all year on Sunday in Madison, and I asked it to a guy that went to my high school. Did you think Mia would be Walker Mast? No. If you've watched Braxton Mia's tape before this season, he does a few things. He blocks shots, he catches lobs, and he dunks. I think 23 of his 27 made field goals this year are dunks. I don't think he thought that Braxton Mia was going to be that. He was recruited because they thought they had a good shot at a guy who wound up in the Big Ten that would have been a really athletic big who is playing in the Big Ten now. And they did not end up with him. So that's how Braxton Mia wound up on the roster. Why has he never had a solid point guard? I don't know. Just I don't have a great answer for that. More from Mark. Is Bryce not a leader and actually plays better as a role player? Why is Gary allowed to jack threes when he dominates the paint? I think Bryce Williams is a good Robin. I don't think he's Batman. Why is Juwan Gary allowed to jack threes? It goes back to like the player confidence thing I was talking about. I don't know how long that leash can continue to be because his bread and butter is that around the rim, getting to the rim, fighting for rebounds, the scrappy stuff. That's Juwan Gary's MO. That should be where he's playing. Hoiberg is supposedly an offensive wizard, but every end game scenario we rarely get off shot. What is our offensive identity? That's the $1 million question. Because it's not the stereotypical Fred Hoiberg 5-out pace and space. Not with this group. And is Hoiberg's seat hot? Right now, I would not call it hot. I would compare it to like when you accidentally, like I used to live in a house with a gas stove and I'd accidentally like run into one of the knobs and you'd like hear the gas turn on, like the tick, 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 but it wasn't like burning yet. You could like turn it off if you wanted to. That's what I'd compare it to. I would say there's definitely, there's still 11 games to go. It depends on how the season ends, but the vibes have been so bad. And there's going to be some eyeballs on, after 6 seasons, if this does not end in, postseason play, you got to look at the full body of work. You have to. I'm not an athletic director. I'm not gonna say what should happen, but just you have to look at the full body of work after 6 seasons, and that sets the stage for next year. Fred got an extension from an interim athletic director and an interim university president. Right before the in-state tournament last season. I think I'm gonna. This is great podcasting, but I'm gonna look up the length of it right here. An extension to 28-29. So there'd be 25, 26. There'd be 4 years left on his contract. I think quick math was never my strong suit, but I wouldn't say hot seat, but it's like you just turn the burner on. There's no boiling. You can turn it off quick. Like you can find some goodwill if you just turn it off quick. But I wouldn't say hot by any means. And then the last question from Mark: why don't other players get a shot when we're playing this bad? What is the real reason we're so bad on the road? Did Riley Worcester have turnover problems at Utah? No, he did not. He was near the top of assist to turnover ratio just last season before he season ended with an injury. What is Berke's role on offense? I think he's the mystery guy. He's the mystery. I think the mold is there for what they want him to be. I just don't know if he has it. Did Hoiberg just miss on the portal players? Can he turn this around? I mean, they did miss on portal guys. They've missed on portal guys each of the last 2 seasons. A lot of them with local ties, some of them not with local ties. I mean, I think about guys that are after last spring, like Igor Milicic Jr., who's at Tennessee. Obviously, a lot was made about the local guys, Fiddler and Kyle this past summer, and then Salas and Latrell Wrightsell the previous offseason. I mean, they've missed. They've had some misses. They just have. I mean, Kerr Kriisa was on campus at one point. I mean, they've brought a bunch of guys in, and I think they went 3 for 3 with their 3 major acquisitions going into last season, and Mast, Bryce Williams, and Josiah Alec. And I mean, you can't, to get lightning in a bottle and have every guy hit would have been miraculous. But I mean, I would say that they have missed in the portal. They've missed in the portal more than, I mean, when you think about the team before that, Greasel, Bandamel, Gary. I mean, they hit with those guys. I mean, Juwan Gary's still here. Greasel and Bandamel are still talked about for the impact that they made on the program. So, I mean, it's the portal and NIL and that whole thing. I mean, it's Nebraska's in an interesting spot. I alluded to that earlier, talking about the NIL, and that's got to be something for a program like Nebraska that puts you over the top. Like talking to guys, you can show them the facilities and talk about fan support and the system and all that, but there's got to be a separator, right? There's got to be a separator, and the Nebraska basketball NIL operation still leaves a lot to be desired. Why don't other players get a shot? I mean, they're still playing 8 guys. I mean, if you want to give more run to Gavin Griffiths, I mean, he's gotten some clock. I mean, I don't know who else they can throw in there. I mean, I think we've seen all the serviceable players on the roster get run, at certain times. We've seen Cale Jacobson minutes. We've seen Gavin Griffiths start of the year that he fell out of the rotation. I mean, that's a lot of questions from Mark, but we appreciate Mark. Next up is my guy Lardy Fatkins on Twitter. Why does everyone overlook Hoiberg's atrocious recruiting? He has to be dead last in the Big Ten, which not coincidentally, it looks like where we'll finish. You got to separate it into the first 3 seasons and the season since. To say that the proverbial ball was dropped the first 3 seasons by the person that was in charge of recruiting would be an understatement. There's plenty that could be said about the uphill battle that has had to be made by Fred Hoiberg and Nate Lemser locally, the perception, with them recruiting wise, nationally. I mean, there could be plenty to be said, and that's just with high school guys. And, the portal, it supposedly is a level playing field, but I mean, I mean, it's been pretty tough sledding. They've gotten a lot out of guys that they've gotten a lot out of some guys. Some other guys have not panned out, been hits. I mean, that's the portal though. Kind of all over the place. Some guys are hits, some guys are misses, and when you have a majority of portal guys, the portal can dictate the ceiling of your season. Keisei Tomonaga fan club. What's with Fred's neglect/lack of ability to target a point guard? This guy discovered Monte Morris, and our best point guard under him was Cam Mack. No offense to Cam, but that's just not a recipe for consistent winning in the Big Ten. You need guard play, and we have rarely had it. I agree, Keisei Tomonaga fan club. Cam Mack had the first triple-double in program history. People forget about that. But I mean, yeah, point guard play, that's kind of been one of the overarching themes of the entire Fred Hoiberg era is the lack of a true point guard. David asks, what's the NIL investment for basketball? Is that holding Nebraska back from being constant competitive, being the constant competitive team we all want? I mean, there's still a lot to be desired, man. There's a lot to be desired with NIL when it comes to basketball. I think revenue sharing will be a big thing for Nebraska as well when that comes to be in basketball. Dave Fight, follow-up question. Is competitive team we all want a belief held by the people controlling the NIL purse strings? There's a difference between getting outbid and not showing up to the auction. I think that both of those things have happened to Nebraska, getting outbid and then just not showing up. I think that's happened twice. A couple questions from the DMs. MMJ, he gave me a few of them. In your opinion, what was the driving force for an interim administrator to give Fred a contract extension? It seems to have removed urgency and forced at least one, if not two more years for Fred, regardless of results. They made the NCAA tournament for the first time in a decade. They showed signs of tangible momentum, progress, commitment to an identity. They finished fourth in the Big Ten. They made the NCAA tournament for the first time in 10 years. A program that's only been to 8 NCAA tournaments before. They've now been to 9. They haven't won a game in the NCAA tournament, in case you forgot. I think there's still urgency. Like, there's definitely still a, prove it, with some people when it comes. I mean, there'll always be a prove it when it comes to Nebraska basketball. Because it's a football school and everyone is football pilled, and you gotta prove it to earn some dollars and cents from people who are used to just giving money to football or to other programs. You got to prove it. You got to show consistency. You got to show a commitment to an identity and all that jazz. I mean, Fred Hoiberg. I mean, we may not be having this conversation if 2 seasons ago Keisei Tomonaga doesn't catch fire in January and February, and Nebraska scraps and claws its way to 16-16. A lot has been said about Keisei Tomonaga and his impact on the program and how much fans love him and how much he's missed. But I mean, he saved Fred Hoiberg's job. Plain and simple. The run that he went on with the Sam Griesel team 2 years ago, the heater they caught toward the end of that year, that saved Fred Hoiberg's job. There's no other way to put it. There's no other way to put it. That's as blunt as I can get. Some more from MMJ. Not that the season is over, but looking ahead, Nebraska is looking at a near complete rebuild. I know this game has changed, but it seems like roster mismanagement to not have a core to develop. Maybe Connor, maybe Rank. Other than that, a lot of holes to fill. I mean, yeah, they have 6 seniors. They have 6 seniors on this team. And I believe the scholarship guys who are eligible to be back next year, all signs point to Rink Mast returning, coming off the injury. And then it's Connor Season, Gavin Griffiths, and then the guys redshirting. So Nick Janowski and Braden Frager, right? I'm looking at, I got to look at the rest of the roster because Berke and Gavin are true sophomores. Sam Hoiberg, back. Cale Jacobson, back. Yeah, we lose Williams, Gary, Morgan, Worcester, Euless, and Mia. So that is another near complete and total rebuild. That is correct. It's become all too familiar. I mean, I'll say this. They really like the freshmen that are redshirting. I'm not saying they're going to be like all league guys, but they're really high on Nick Janowski and Braden Frager. I think they could contribute next season. the way they've been developing. But it would be another offseason in the portal, trying to rebuild a roster, which just feels all too familiar. What are your thoughts on who has improved this season under Fred? It seems to me some have backtracked. Who has improved? It's a good question. Andrew Morgan. I think he's been the most consistent. You know what you're getting out of him, guy. So I don't know if he's improved. I just know he's been the most consistent. Like, you know what you're gonna get. In terms of improvement, that's a really good question. It looked like it might have been Aaron Eulis, and with the 10 assist game, but that was just a little one off. I don't have an answer for that. I'm sorry, MMJ, but I appreciate the questions, and I appreciate you reaching out. The last set of questions is from Joey on Twitter. Are you ready to move on from Fred? What can you do besides win games to change that? If it's a yes, I am. I mean, I'm not a fan to answer this question, but I mean, the vibe I get is that I don't think there's going to be a change after this season, regardless of result, and I think there's going to be a lot of weight added to next year if it keeps trending the way that it is right now. And what can you do besides win games? I mean, players win games. You can't win games without good players. There's my Belichick. Is there any scenario Fred gets let go? Not this season. Nope. Who do you think can get them to the tourney more consistently and win a game or games? I don't want to give like a list of coaches. There are guys out there, but I'm not going to give a list because I don't think there's going to be a coaching change. Why are his teams so bipolar, especially the home run record over the past couple of years? That might be the actual $1 million question. But I mean, winning on the road in the Big Ten is hard. I mean, I went and I did the I did the math. I think it was before the Maryland game of where Nebraska has won the most on the road. Keep in mind, they've been in this conference since 2011. They've been in this conference for almost 15 years now. And they've won less on the road than you'd think they have. I'll just run down the list. And this is not just Nebraska. This is not just Nebraska under Fred. This is Doc Sadler and Tim Miles. Nebraska basketball, the road venue that they have won the most at since joining the Big Ten is Assembly Hall. They have won there 4 times. They have won at the Bryce Jordan Center and the RAC 3 times. They have won at Minnesota, at Iowa, at Michigan State, at Wisconsin, and at Ohio State twice. And everywhere else, this is the original Big Ten, not the West Coast teams. So, Mackey Arena, they've only won there. They've never won there. They've won at Michigan once. They've won at Maryland once. They've won at Illinois once. And they've won at who else does that leave in the old Big Ten? I'm forgetting somebody. But that is a lot of road losses since Nebraska joined this conference. It's not just a phenomenon under Fred Hoiberg. It's been a consistent thing. Winning on the road has been hard. It is kind of funny that the venue they've won at the most since joining the conference is Indiana, which just gives into the Indiana basketball, Nebraska football Venn diagram more and more. So those are the questions. I hope my answers suffice. That's as blunt and honest as I can get. This roster, it's a flawed roster. Roster construction, questionable. NIL leaves a lot to be desired. They have to be, they've looked to kind of moneyball it, and the results have been what they've been. The market for NIL is definitely inflated, but it's you're in a conference with a lot of basketball rich schools, basketball rich programs, deep histories, deep pockets. It's an uphill climb for Nebraska in the NIL sphere when it comes to basketball. And then just the overarching, like, it's, are we going to see this desperation, this now or never like attitude that we heard from Fred Hoiberg on Wednesday? It starts against Illinois, then it's a West Coast swing out to Oregon and Washington. But I mean, this team, the season has, to call it topsy turvy would be an understatement. Some people would just call it turvy, not a lot of topsy, but it kind of feels oddly similar to the 2018-19 season, but there's not going to be a coaching change at the end of the year. Like, they had tangible momentum coming off a good year. They beat Creighton at the start of the year. There was a game at the Pentagon, and then they just started to sputter in January, and things went off the rails, and they scratched and clawed their way to the NIT. And I'm not saying that's the path that we're on here, but it kind of feels like the vibes are similar. But I don't think there's going to be. I don't think there's not going to be a coaching change at the end of the season. There isn't, unless someone really wants to write a check to cut bait, which I don't know if anyone will, because I don't know if there's that. I don't know if there's some basketball donor chomping at the bit to do that. Just look at their NIL support. So that is the State of the Season podcast. Just me, no guest. I talked for over an hour. I gave some thoughts. The cliff notes are, this team has been flawed the entire time. Their margin for error has been pencil thin. We know what their recipe for success is. We have seen that script flip, and they have lost 6 straight. Can they find any semblance of the intensity and identity that they had through the first 14 games of this season with 11 to go? And I'm not even going to talk about anything after those 11 games, whether it be the chance they don't make the Big Ten tournament. They're currently sitting in 17th in an 18-team conference. Only 15 teams make the Big Ten tournament. And I believe right now KenPom projects them to be in a 3-way tie to possibly make or miss the Big Ten tournament. So that is what KenPom has projected right now. And Bart Torvik has them projected to miss the Big Ten tournament, I believe. Projected, yeah, I believe that, yeah, they would miss it in that projection. So it starts with Illinois, the number 18 team in the country. There are 5 Big Ten teams ranked right now. Nebraska lost to one of them by 37, one of them by 36, one of them by 28, and they play the other 2 in the next 6 days. Illinois on Thursday night at Pinnacle Bank Arena, and Oregon on the road in Eugene on Sunday. You can tune into After Nebrasketball. We'll have post-game shows after Illinois and Oregon. Check out my column leading into Illinois on HuskersIllustrated.com. And stick around for whenever this podcast comes out again. But this was my pretty blunt State of the Season podcast. Nebraska is going through 2 things: a losing streak and an identity crisis. Something's got to give. Which one has to give for the other one to end? We will find out the rest of the way. Subscribe to the show, leave a review, tell a friend. The tweet from me saying that this pod was going to be the State of the Season pod got a lot of engagement. If you enjoyed this, subscribe to the show, follow on socials, check out After Nebrasketball, join the postgame show on YouTube with me, Caleb Henry, and Jack Mitchell. There's going to still be some content the rest of this season, even if it feels like we're the violinists on the Titanic. There will be content. There will be me yapping about basketball the rest of the way. So I appreciate you guys tuning in. We will talk to you soon. Be sure to tell someone you love them. And until then, take it easy.